All right. Thank you very much for having me. So this is work I've been working on together with Guido van der Werf. So to start off straight away, on this map you see recent trends observed in annual burned area over the period 2000 to 2012. So this is also found by some other researchers that over this relatively short period we see a clear decline in annual burned area over northern Africa, while especially for more arid areas of southern Africa we see a clear increase with a somewhat more mixed figure of increases and declines in the more humid savannas. So in order to understand those recent trends actually, we started to look at spatial patterns in order to get a better hold of the parameters that might drive them. And then we built a simple statistical model basically to try to explain them. So here on the top what you see is the annual burned area in Africa. And what you can see straight away is two things basically. One is that it's a very important feature in many ecosystems. So many large areas burning annually or every second year. And the second thing is that it's not spatially homogeneous at all. It's very, it varies a lot in space. So we started with looking at the impact of precipitation. So on the bottom you see annual burned area on the y-axis and precipitation on the x-axis. And what we can see is that in very arid areas there's very little fire occurring usually due to lack of precipitation, lack of biomass buildup. And then actually annual burned areas increasing to reach its maximum more or less at 1,000 to 1,200 millimeters of precipitation, so productive savannas. After which it starts to decline again, and this is mostly due to too high fuel humidity. So there's two processes. Precipitation both has a positive effect on annual burned area by biomass buildup and a negative effect on it by driving fuel humidity. So in this study we focus on the area between the two red lines, so those are the savanna ecosystems basically, which include most fires actually, and all the other regions are masked in gray in the maps. So next we know that humans play a very important role driving those fires actually, and what we see is that traditionally humans have used fires for regeneration of grass, so basically for grazing, but also to attract wildlife for hunting. Prevention of large fires, so if you time the fires and you create them early in the season around the villages or around the fields, you prevent later fires from destroying those. Pasture maintenance, so as is also said before, fires play a very important role in tree-grass interactions. So frequent fires suppress grasses, which is good for cattle grazing basically. And finally shifting agriculture, so it's used to clear fields or for nutrient recycling. So this might be like a kind of a traditional images of traditional livelihood, which especially occurs I think in northern Africa, where people have a semi-nomadic existence, and they go with their herds following the seasons, and on their way they burn large swaths to keep them clear, especially in the more humid savannas of trees. And also in the more humid savannas you see that soil humidity might be so high that even without rain you might already have grasses resprouting, which is good for the cattle of course. However, in more modern societies we see a decline in fire activity, and there's various reasons for that, and one of them is simply that people and governments often think it's bad. So this is basically a misunderstanding of the role of fire, I guess, in savanna ecosystems. And finally, of course, they're also seen as a risk for property, so that's a but also there are other reasons, like fragmentation of the landscape, for example, due to road building or land cover changes. Like those grass-fueled fires are often very quick and not very hot, so a single road might already break the fire and it can't continue on the other side, basically. And finally, simply fewer ignitions. Like if you picture that traditional livelihood where the common grounds and pasture is very important, and then we go to this image of more modern land use basically in many savannas, especially northern Africa, then you can see that livelihoods have changed a lot, and also in these kind of systems there's no place for this traditional livelihood which is so much associated with frequent fires. So on this figure, on the y-axis again you see burned area, and on the x-axis cropland extent, and this is actually for northern area, northern Africa, like the spatial distribution within the savanna ecosystem. And you see that basically untouched savannas might face up to 40 to 50% of annual burn area, while if there's only 10% cropland within a certain grid cell, that drops already to half of it, after which it declines more gradually. So I've plotted two, like the blue dots actually indicate country means, and I've put two names of them. So first you see Nigeria, which is obviously everybody knows very populated, relatively prosperous for the region, high cropland extent and low annual burnt area. And then we go to Central African Republic, which has hardly any agriculture and very high annual burnt area. So this can be seen as kind of also maybe a trajectory that different countries might follow, and we might also think that some countries have faced a higher burnt area in the past because of this. So then we started to build a very simple statistical model based on multiple linear regressions and some spatial clustering to prevent overfitting. And we only used three parameters basically: a positive precipitation burn area response based on biomass buildup, a negative one based on fuel humidity, and finally change in cropland extent, which we use as an indicator for socioeconomic changes also. So to start with, the impact of variation in precipitation. On the top again you can see like the observed trends in burn area. So the clear decline in northern Africa and the somewhat more mixed figure in southern Africa. And on the bottom here you can see that part of the trend that according to our model was driven due to short-term precipitation variation or trends over the study period. And we see that especially in more arid areas of southern Africa, most of the trends apparently can be explained by precipitation. And in northern Africa, some of this decline apparently might be explained by precipitation, but clearly not all of it. So, as everybody knows, sea surface temperatures have a very important effect on precipitation patterns there and interannual variation in precipitation. So we related, on the top you see actually the correlation between annual burnt area and the multivariate ENSO index. So you see actually quite high correlation, and you see that ENSO has a mostly negative correlation for southern Africa, while it has a positive correlation for northern Africa. And then on the bottom you see the long-term variation basically in sea surface temperature, or the multivariate ENSO index. And then in the black box you see our relatively short study period, over which you can see a clear decline. So basically a shift from El Niño dominated conditions in the beginning of our relatively short study period towards La Niña dominated conditions in the end of the study period. And those are apparently driving those trends caused by precipitation. So we expect them to be of relatively short duration basically. It might turn back to normal pretty soon. However, then cropland extent was also included in the model, and we see that especially in northern Africa, actually a part of the trend can be explained by increasing cropland extent at the expense of the savanna ecosystem, and especially in countries like Nigeria, Mali or Burkina Faso, you see a quite rapid decline actually in annual burnt area due to this conversion. And in total we could explain like or we saw that there was at the speed of like 4.3% decline in annual burnt area per decade in entire northern Africa due to those land cover changes. So to wrap up, precipitation governs when and where fires can occur. Savannas have to be seen as cultural landscapes where generations of people have shaped ecosystems through the use of fires. Our model could explain up to 50% of the observed trends over the study period. And recent trends in burnt area driven by precipitation are related to a short-term shift from El Niño to La Niña dominated conditions are likely to be temporarily. And then what remains is future annual burnt area in African savannas is likely to decline actually due to those ongoing underlying socio-economic changes. So thank you very much for your attention.
We have time for one or two quick questions.
Oh, sorry, I have to. I thought that you would. Well, you, sir, then in front.
Where is the data on agricultural change coming from at that fine temporal?
It's MODIS data actually. So what you see is that there's quite a bit of interannual variation, but because we used annual data, then in the end you get like quite a robust figure actually.
Your graph of percent cropland area and percent burned area, is that percent burned area a subset of the savannas within that grid cell, or is it of the total grid cell?
Sorry, you mean this one?
Yeah, so cropland percent, and then the burned area.
So basically you have to see this figure as like a series of box plots, and the grid cells are within the box plots. So so this is the distribution of grid cells, and like each quality degree grid cell can have like a certain percentage of cropland and a certain percentage of savanna. If that answers your question.